here are the main things that I want to be talking about today. So we have the work-life program, we have affinity groups, we have activism teams, we have clubs, and I am going to talk a little bit about advisory as well, right, as parts of our co-curricular program and ways that that is going to build community and develop possible leadership skills, and also just a little bit more details about each of these programs. Okay, so this is the work-life program. So basically what the work-life program is that, well, let me tell you about the goals for it first, then I'll tell you about how it's going to work, is that this is an opportunity for students to engage with the actual operations of the school, right? To have some time each week where they are responsible for some aspect of the things that need to go on in order to keep the school rolling. Our goals for that is that it's going to deepen their ownership of the school and really make it feel like they do have the ability to direct the, like, their opinion is valued and important, and they are an integral part of how the school actually operates, right? We want to deepen their sense of ownership of the school and their investment and how it goes. We also think that this is going to be really valuable to give structured practice in adulting tasks. So one of the things that particularly in the last like 5 to 10 years as a high school educator is we observe that students who leave school really feel deeply uncomfortable with certain parts of managing their own life, right? That, one of the jokes is about phone calls, right? Like any 19-year-old who has to make their own dentist appointment is going to panic most likely a little bit, right? Like that sort of thing, that they just don't have the practice of doing a lot of the tasks that are maybe not our favorite things to do as adults, but are something that we need to not be afraid of in order to be a successful part of an independent living. And just to provide structured practice for those things so that they're not intimidating when they get to a part of life where they have to be taking care of those tasks for themselves. And also, this is going to be a really important way to develop mentoring relationships with adults on campus outside of their teachers. So how it's going to work is that students are going to take, there's going to be one or two, we're going to call them shifts, I think, a week, that is going to be essentially during a class period. Instead of going to class, they'll go to the work-life shift. And for ninth grade, it'll be one class, one period for sure. But as students age up, they could have potentially choose an option that is more than one shift a week. Choosing what parts of the school they want to get to know more would be something that they would get to choose during the registration process, just like they choose an elective during the registration process. There's not necessarily going to be a guarantee that everybody gets their first choice, right? But students will be able to select from a list of things that interest them. The types of things that we've brainstormed that could be potential work-life assignments would be partly annually dependent, right? And types of things that need to happen at each part of the school year, and some things will be the same year round. But things like, being on facility support in terms of like doing repairs in the school, right? Like if there's a something that needs to get fixed, that would be something that you could support. Could be on a community lunch like preparation team, right, where we have lunch together once a week as a community, and you can be part of the group that plans and prepares the food for that. You could be on a social media team where you work on promoting the Hatch School brand via social media. You could be support for the office in terms of answering phones or emails or, checking attendance, that sort of thing. You could be on a hiring committee, right, and offer your opinions, and learn more about what the interviewing process looks like. You could be part of the student government is viewed as one of the things that we would have as a work-life task. You could be, right, there's lots of different options, right, that we're envisioning. And we want to have some option with the finance office, but I'm not entirely sure what that's a really important for us to figure out what that's going to look like, but we don't really have a clear vision of what that would be yet. But we do want financial literacy to be part of the skills that we teach through this program. And then a student could potentially make a commitment to one thing that they really like doing, and they want to do it for like over and over again for a year. Once they find something they like, they could stick with it, or they could try lots of different things over the time at school. And if at some point they're like, man, like these opportunities are no longer growing the skills that I'd like to, they can work with us to figure out off-campus options for work life, like an internship possibility where they can develop their skills with a different organization. We're also really hoping that HSDC will be able to provide some opportunities for work-life internships for us over these first years we're in the building with them. So that's something that we'll look forward to developing with them as we move forward. Okay, questions about work life before I move on to the next thing? We have so much to cover that I just feel like I should keep going. Okay, we also plan to have dedicated time for affinity groups each week at school. So affinity groups we think are really important in terms of supporting students with diverse identities and experiences in a community that is diverse, right? Sometimes it's really important to have a moment where you can like let your hair down and just be like, I know that I'm together with people who have a shared cultural experience that I do, of whatever type of culture that might be. This idea of like relating, reflecting, and revising, right? Like this is an opportunity to be with people who can relate to your experiences, to reflect on how that experience is happening within the larger community, and to make recommendations to revise our general practice of how we are when we are together in a diverse community to be more inclusive and welcoming. These are going to be collaboratively led between students and adults on campus who share that affinity. Um, like I said, we're going to have time set aside each week, and that the ninth grade humanities theme is about identity and how identity leads to conflict a lot of times. And one of the things that we'll do as part of the ninth grade curriculum is have students do reflections on kind of their own identity and what parts of their identity would they like to seek greater affinity for at school, right? So that's going to help inform what affinity groups meet and how frequently they do. But I anticipate that there's going to be affinity groups for students who have, you know, students based on their racial and ethnic backgrounds, affinity groups based on their gender, sexuality, affinity groups perhaps based on their learning profiles. You know, there's lots of different possibilities. Family structure, there's options for affinity groups. And really what we hope for this to be is an opportunity for students to reflect about what part of their identity feels somewhat dissonant at school, and they could use some greater support around like what does it mean to integrate that part of their identity with their school experience. That I think is the core question of what we want to explore with that. Okay, any questions about affinity groups? Okay. um so our activism teams, this is something that I'm really excited about that we've developed in lieu of kind of a traditional like you have to do 20 hours of community service a year sort of requirement. I've been in a number of schools that have had that kind of requirement, and like some students really thrive and find an organization where they really like they develop an ongoing partnership and they learn something that's really important about their community and what it means to serve. Other times it's like, you know, May 16th and students are like, is there any sort of race this weekend? I got to get a couple of hours in, right? And that to me is like not the point of having a service requirement, right? Like this is about really understanding your community and how you can make a contribution to make your community a better place. So what we're thinking of doing is having these active teams that meet weekly, where the service part of what they're doing doesn't come in until they've gone through a number of other steps first, right? So the group of students can be like, what are issues that are important to us that we'd like to learn more about, right? Like, and then break up into groups of students who want to work together on a team to solve that, or not to solve, not going to solve, to work on, you know, how they can be influential in adjusting that issue. Um, and then they're going to learn about that issue, right? Ideally by connecting with organizations in our community who are already working on that issue, right? And talking to people who have, you know, made it their life's work to figure out how to make progress on that issue. And then brainstorm how they can be most influential in affecting change on that issue, and then go out and do the service, right? So really those initial steps of figuring out how they can leverage their influence before they take action to be in service for their community. That's something that I think that is missing from a lot of community service requirements. And I think that this is going to be both more meaningful to students and more useful for the communities that we serve. And this would be weekly meetings, right? And some of the actual service parts of that probably would happen outside of the class meeting, but the planning and the learning would all happen during the times set aside during the school day. Onward. Clubs. We get a lot of questions, particularly from students about clubs. And this is something that's kind of hard for us to answer because we don't have any, we can't tell you the list of clubs that we have right now, right? And that's because we think that clubs inherently need to be student led and driven, right? Like it doesn't make any sense to have a club that nobody cares about, right? And that, you have to go to choose a club to go to during some time. So our plan is that there's going to be a block during each day between D and E blocks that is set aside essentially for community meetings and clubs, and that students can decide that there's a club that they'd like to develop. They can seek adult support for putting that together. We'll find them a room, schedule a meeting, you go to town, right? Some clubs require more adult support than others, right? Particularly clubs that are part of a larger organization that has like, you know, meetups or competitions or robotics or debate. Those require a lot more adult support, and we're gonna make sure that we set the stage so that students aren't intimidated in expressing interest, because they're like, oh man, if I say that I want to do Model UN, does that mean that I have to run it? No, right? So like we'll support that if we can get a critical mass of students who are interested in it, but we need we need our students to tell us what types of clubs that they want to have, but we will support that happening, and there's time set aside in the schedule for us to make sure that those clubs have adequate time to meet. Okay. um we have a minute or two, I think, to talk about advisory. um So advisory programs are pretty common in independent schools in particular. And this is something that I have a lot of opinions about based on how I've seen advisory programs work before. And I think that what we're gonna shoot for at first is that we're gonna have a ninth grade advisory program that is very structured, right? That there are a lot of particular activities and skills that happen during the ninth grade year that are really about like, hey, we're all in ninth grade together. None of us were in middle school together, and all of a sudden we're in high school. And like, how do we come together as a community? What are the things I need to know in order to be a successful student? How do I learn those things, right? Like, so this might include like, we are going to learn how to we're all going to practice sending an email to a teacher asking for additional help. We're all going to do that together. Or it might be, we're all going to learn about the Pomodoro method for, workload management, or, like sorts of structure, or, right, like, we're all going to play Jenga, right? Like sorts of more community building and really focusing on um, making sure that ninth graders have an opportunity to interact with other students in a low key, casual way, opportunities to build friendships, opportunities to, um, just have a lower bar to ask questions about things that they probably think that they should already know the answer to, right? Like, I don't really know how am I supposed to do that thing, right? Like that is the sort of thing that I think that ninth grade advisory will really be about. And it will be largely run by like the structure of the advisory will be run by the ninth grade advisors. At the end of ninth grade, I think that we'll transition to a mixed grade advisory where it's 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. But that is like, my hope is we will grow into a situation where the 10th through 12th grade advisories all have their own kind of personality, right? And that students can then choose which advisories are the one that they think is the one that will be most successful for them. But some things that are all going to be shared by all of the 10th to 12th grade advisories will be about, this is about deepening connections between the students and the advisory, and also between the student and the advisor. Your advisor is going to be somebody who really supports you as you make course choices, as you move through the hard parts of being in college or in high school, transitioning to college, right? There's a lot of places where your advisor can be a really instrumental person in directing your high school experience. So deepening those connections and learning about each other's kind of full and complex selves is going to be a big part of what advisory is. And also, like, advisory is a place where it's like a safe space to come in and like be like, I need to talk about how, I've had I need to talk about what's going on in my humanities class right now. Oh my gosh, can we process this together? Or can you help me figure out how to work on this? Or like, can you help me figure out how to talk to my parents about this? Like, those are the sorts of conversations that I think that successful advisories really have. And that having the advisory be driven by choice, right, where students can move into an advisory community that already feels like their people, I think will make that advisory group that much more successful to offer support and kind of be the school version of a family, right? Like this is some place where you can kind of be a little bit more authentic in your day-to-day school life.